strange events that have taken place in, around, and because of said location. Before we get started, please make sure you've joined us in the Roundtable Discord server where we record this podcast every day at 8 p.m. Central, as well as at other times. Keep an eye on the announcements channel to see our upcoming events. We got great events every day. And especially make sure you've checked out the RT podcast channel. And please like, follow, and subscribe to our 4 content channels, each of which have hundreds of unique episodes. So check that out and join us on the round table. That being said, welcome Inspirational Madness. Thank you for joining me. How are you, my friend?
Hey, yeah, I'm great today. I'm not really sure where to begin with this. I'm not prepared to answer anything on my own. So I would like it, since you kind of know this situation a little bit better than I've spoken to you about this the most out of everyone. So I don't know if someone could guide me with some questions and go from there.
Absolutely. I'm going to interview you, so hopefully my questions will help you unpack the story. So how did you first become aware of this particular building as a place of interest to you? So where did your interest in this particular location begin?
So in the very beginning, it was right at the right at the beginning of the protests and the movements here in my city in 2020. So that was around May-ish, and my city, of course, Breonna Taylor city, it received a lot of attention. That's it's Google will help you with that more than I would be explaining it here. And so I was new to kind of getting involved with things like that. I didn't have many people to go activist protesting with, and I also didn't have a vehicle at the time, so I was kind of scared to be doing those things on my own, and I didn't know the environment. And so one thing that building first had an interest for me is that it was a 13-story abandoned building that oversaw the entire city. And despite what fears people may have about such a place, it was more safe there than it was on the streets, because nobody really was trying to commit a hard crime in a place like that. So it actually was way more safe than a passerby may think it was. So I started going there originally because I could see what was going on in the city with the movements and the marches and everything, and essentially watched it from that vantage point, and kind of participated. I mean, there were times when, we even had DHS spy Cessnas that would fly in the air around that time. And the news even made reports about that after the fact. And also black helicopters and other things that were very interested in the activity going on in the city. And I remember there had been many times when sometimes it even circled the building, a person up there, and I had asked people later, why is this? And, they just precautions or whatever. And I had my own way of getting kind of involved with what was going on, but from a distance on my own. And that's kind of where it first began. But then it started becoming a little different for me. Was when I kind of found a form of solace by going there, because so if you go inside the building, it was kind of like almost sensory deprivation in a way, because there were certain floors that the walls are made of cork. Actually, all of the walls are made, but it echoes louder than a cathedral. So that, combined with darkness and almost soundproof, you have a very your senses are perceptually very different in that environment. And so I started to kind of just speak out loud what I was thinking and feeling, and because it sounded amazing and it was kind of hypnotic in a way. And so I got very addicted to this. and then I just started, over a period of time, I got, more and more involved in this, and I felt that I started to eliminate all kinds of preconceived fears about being alone, especially a young girl by themselves alone in an abandoned building at night. When I started doing this and I started being able to do, speak my thoughts aloud, and I'd even pray there all at the same time. And it created a very, like I said earlier, kind of a hypnotic type of euphoric state of mind. And it really, really changed me forever. Like, I can get into very, very scary situations now and not feel fear. And some of it was thanks to what I was doing there. And pretty much in the midst of that occurring, what else? Yeah, about the interest. Trying to keep this on to your question. What drew my interest to it? In the midst of me doing that, I did it very frequently to the point where, I wasn't in college at the time. I wasn't from the city, so I didn't know too many people here to just do things with. So it became also a pastime, and it became very ritualistic that I would go to these protests. I'd go specifically to the center of the city where it was the epicenter of what was going on. I would see what was going on, and then I'd be like, okay, I have thoughts on this. And then I'd go to this building, and then I'd basically say it to myself what was going on. But like I mentioned, that hypnotic euphoric state where it would, we could last anywhere from 2 to 5 hours. That, they talk about sometimes people who can pray for that long. Well, that's essentially what it was becoming. And I would talk about how I saw things that were going on. And I did this in this environment because these were thoughts and ideas that were more unconventional than they were to be in the minds of everyone else. I wasn't like, fuck 12, but I also wasn't like, oh, I hate protesters, Blue Lives Matter only. It was, a very combined sort of perspective, and I did not know where else to portray this.
What led you to this?
Yeah, Seth, please don't interrupt in the podcast. So continue if you weren't finished, Inspirational Madness.
Damn. Okay. Mistakes happen, but so I was doing that. I don't even remember what the fuck I was saying now. It was a deep thought.
All right. Well, that's okay. That's a good introduction. I think you've established, that you form this emotional connection, spiritual connection to this building. Now, before we go further into this story and start getting into the conspiracy theory, I want to take a step back. So I know, you used to be Agent Breeway, and I know that you do a lot of activism and like protest stuff, and you participate in these protests. So just for some background context, I think it becomes relevant a little bit later in the story. What kind of protests were you involved in? What kind of activism or political causes specifically were you engaged in?
Yeah, I was never there for the reason people thought I was. And I was told by certain people in that movement that the people on their side they think I'm an undercover cop, and apparently, according to them, they think that the police think I am some sort of informant for them, for the other side. So they said, now I quote this, "There's a big question mark around who you are. You're a familiar face, but nobody knows whose side you're on." And that was the facts about it, because I would go to the protest and I'd be pretty chill with them. And then I'd go right by the police department and basically wave to them. And that's how it went for a long time. And so what is my position in that was, I had my own agenda. I did not come from a background where I was abused by police officers or neglected by them. And I didn't come from a background where I saw if you're in a world of poverty, whether you're black or white, it just automatically means you're up to no good, you're crime ridden. And I didn't come from either of those backgrounds. So me going into that was sort of like, damn, well, I see how both of these sides have big things in common almost because of how different they are. And so I, took it upon myself to try to understand both of these people as much as possible. I tried to volunteer for LMPD in the middle of that, but I could not because they closed a lot of things to citizens. And try to volunteer for the movement as well, and they didn't know what I was standing for, so they slowly just were like, nah. But yeah, that's about it.
But just to be clear, though, you did attend some of these big street protests, right? I think some of them even became riots at times. Is that correct?
Yep.
Right. And so what were the causes that these protests or riots were about, regardless of where you personally stood on the issue? What were the causes that you were attending these protests for or about?
Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter. That's it. Just hold your fists up and say BLM. That's about it. It's what they themselves say to do. Yeah, that's basically it. And I could get more into that, but I mean, that's essentially what it was.
Right. Okay. So prior to everything that eventually we're going to get into that happens around this building, you were already at least engaged in political activity in the Black Lives Matter movement. Some protests, even some riots occurred. Then we flash forward again. You have this meditative prayer practice that you're doing in this abandoned warehouse type space. So in some of our private conversations, you mentioned to me that you believed or came to believe that not only were you using this space for some kind of ritualistic purposes, but that perhaps some other people or groups were also using it for perhaps darker purposes. Can you talk about that and how you came to believe that?
Right. So in the beginning, I didn't believe it at all. And before I even give that context, I've recently concluded that I think it was just a fucking, I don't mean to curse on this podcast. I think it was a false narrative that they were ever even really doing devil worshiping there. They might have been doing it, or the people that were appointing them to do it were into the dark arts, but the ones that were actually sent there, I don't think they ever truly did it. But whoever the fuck was sending them there actually was. But the people that were sent there, no, I think they were they could have been just trying to act like they did. But it's how did I come to believe that? I didn't believe it at first. When this camp was set up across the street in the span of 3 days, they essentially watched that building, and there were times at the very beginning of their actions there. I do a few things, and they would become verbally aware of it and shout across the street. And then later they declined it. But what did they have to do with that is when I went over to the camp originally trying to figure out what their purpose was, that was one of the first things they told me. When I was talking to some of their campers, they mentioned, hey, I'd be beware of that building over there because I hear people are doing devil worshiping over there. They're doing seances over there. And I'm like, bullshit. I'm like, that's not true. I've been in that building for hours at a time during the mornings, the evenings, the daytime sometimes, particularly at night. Sometimes damn early hours in the morning, anywhere from 1 to 5 a.m. I know that property. You're telling me that people are doing seances over there and I don't know about it? I don't believe you because you've only been here for 3 days and I've been there for the last 2 months for so many hours during the day and I've never seen this, so I don't believe you. I see no evidence of this. I don't believe you. And they just said, okay, whatever. And they said, oh, well, it's haunted at the same time, so you better be careful. I'd stay out of there. And I'm just like, well, I don't believe you. And I didn't believe them. And then I had a now significant other in my life who was not at that time, who is, he's a journalist and he he did stuff in the movement as well, and he was also very interested in that property. And I don't really even want to talk about him, but he also is part of the reason that had helped me to believe that, because he even mentioned the same thing. It's like, oh, I hear people are doing devil worshipping and seances over there. You should be careful. And I'm like, stop. I'm like, so you just told me the same thing that these fuckers told me, and I know y'all aren't related. And you both know the same thing, but I spend more hours there than than you and these people. So how could you know? I didn't believe them, and it just didn't make any sense. And so I kept going there, and then I started to see things. Then I started going there, and it was like every day there was a new pentagram. Sometimes they pentagrams on top of other pentagrams, and I'm like, okay, this is real. And so then I was way more interested in that aspect of it, but that's how it began.
Okay, so I just want to clarify something. You mentioned a few times the people they sent there. You said the people who sent them you think were involved in this, but you're not sure the people who were sent there were. So, the question then becomes, who do you believe was sending people there, and who was sent there, right? Like, so who is it doing the sending, right, in your opinion?
Truthfully, I can't answer that because I don't fully know. There's theories about who could have done it, or it could be nobody at all. It could be overthinking, underthinking, or right on the dot of accuracy. There were people who theorized and told me this, that. Now, I don't want to get too far into the story, but yeah, people who told me that certain people run that place, and that's who those people are. Because I'm like, yeah, I never saw these people there until it got purchased. Not a single one of these odd people. Not a single one. Who's sending them there? I don't know. It could be too many different things. It could be they wanted to go there on their own, and this was all there, and I just missed it. Apparently, maybe I just missed it. And they were going there, beknownst to me, and it's just all coincidence. Or it's specifically related to the purchase of that building. And it could be a network of people that were being asked to go there by someone else. And the only way I can answer that question is we'd need to get further into this story and then go back to that question.
Well, let's start getting further into this story. So there's a lot of parts to this, and sometimes we use a caveat in Minecraft. Sometimes maybe we'll use metaphorical analogies. We don't feel the need to say anything you don't want to say. So there's then a series of events that take place which complicate the situation greatly. One of them hypothetically involved someone who may or may not have had and discarded a firearm in this location. So without any, specific identifying details, can you tell anything about how that series of events may or may not have transpired?
I honestly have no comment on that because I don't really know anything about that.
Okay.
Wow.
So fair enough. So now at some point this building actually burned down, correct?
No, it was there was two buildings on the property, the 13-story building, which was the big one in question that all the activity had occurred at, and a smaller, about 3-story warehouse building that no one cared about. And from my understanding, no one ever went there, and yeah, and that's the one that burned. Was
it still private property?
Yes, this is the second time I'm telling you not to interrupt. If you do it again, I'm going to be upset with you. This is an interview and you're not conducting it. So, returning to the interview again. So it was a different building, not the one where you go and pray. It was a different building that burned down. Is that correct?
Yes.
But it was close by.
Yes, it is on the property. It's about maybe 100 feet away from it.
Okay. And this fire was ultimately ruined to be an arson, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And at some point, you were actually essentially being treated as a suspect in this investigation, I believe.
Only because I had went to them. I went to the arson detectives, and because of how interested I was in the building, I had a lot of content about it on my phone, and because I already am very trusting of police, I work with them in my current job right now, so I don't feel that I have anything to hide from them. I let them look at my phone. They took a few things out of context and thought that I could have been involved. Totally cleared from that investigation. There's nothing further to say on that other than they realized that it was taken out of context and I don't have anything to do with it.
Which is great. And as I was telling you at the time, I thought it was just going to ultimately blow over. But that's why we're able to now have this conversation when we couldn't before, which is great. So you said you have a bunch of content on your phone pertaining to this building. So can you talk a little bit about like, what kind of content was this? What kind of things did you actually have on your phone?
Right. So when I was asked to investigate the building, it was after that. That started taking pictures of everything. That's when I started writing down when things happen. I'd record when things happen. I would interview people. I would do everything in my power to actually, quote, solve the mystery. Quote, it's a mystery that you have to solve. Like, I'm like, okay, fine, I'll do it. Then I did, and it became one of my addictive pastimes of 2020 to mid-2021. Yeah, it was everything I could get my hands on in regards to trying to figure out what this activity was. What did pictures in Jefferson Square Park of this building have any meaning? Why does nobody know what this building had anything to do with the death of the guy who died over there, which it never did? All other kinds of stuff. I was really just trying to figure out what was going on there, and that was the whole point of me documenting everything that I had.
So you mentioned a person who died and that you believe that this death was somehow connected to this building. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
I don't think his death had anything to do with the building at all. In fact, according to, this had to do with my research of the activity there. He had nothing to do with it. And so, I mean, he was a photographer. He was a journalist who got kind of locally famous for photographing the movement and everything that was going on, and he became an influential person. His name was Tyler Girth. There was a day that it was rumored that some supremacists were supposed to show up. They're going to travel to the city because of what was going on, and they were going to apparently just show up at the park that's in the center of the city. And I didn't really know about that, and I went there anyway. He died. I was there when it happened, and you better believe where I went to talk about this right after it happened. You can guess where I went. And so he died. Pictures of this building were put on his memorial, and I'm like, oh my God, that's my building. That's the building. And I'm like, well, what did he have to do with this? Why are these pictures that are bigger than the picture of Mr. Tyler, Mr. Girth? Pictures that are way bigger than the picture of him on his own death memorial. Why are these pictures like the focal point of his memorial rather than his life? And so I'm like, this is really weird. I looked at all of his social media where he uploaded his pictures that were, pictures of the movement that he did, or just his journalism stuff, his photography stuff, and nothing had anything to do with this building. He did have some pictures of some abandoned buildings that he had photographed, like photography stuff. And, he put aesthetics to it, right? I thought maybe these pictures were, maybe he took these pictures and, maybe, the family in the city put up this memorial, okay? So I thought maybe Tyler had a tight connection with this building, and that's why they decided, oh, man, Tyler just loved this building, and so we need to put these enlarging pictures of the building on his memorial so that people can remember something that, him and something he loved so much. I thought that maybe would have been why. But it didn't make sense because the pictures that Tyler took were highly photoshopped, and he didn't have many pictures of any abandoned buildings, maybe like 3. But the majority of his pictures and what he got famous for was pictures of the movement, which they included none of. He never had a single picture of him on top of the building overlooking the city, which is what 99% of all people who go there do. They take a picture of them in front of the city, and that's really why people go there. And there was none like that. There was nothing I could find on any of the social medias. I talked to people, in the movement. I'm like, hey, what did he have to do with this? Nobody knew. Nobody did anything. I tried to find his family. Nothing came of that. I tried to talk to organizers who organized the memorial. They didn't know. So nobody knew what this had to do with it. And I tried to figure out as best as I could. Nothing. I could go on about that unless you have any other questions regarding it.
Yeah, okay. So in your efforts to continue investigating whatever you felt was going on with this building, at a few different times you went to the building, right? And you went inside, and I think you said to me that security guards actually accompanied you. Is that correct?
That was only way, way later. That was after the arson had occurred. And he did. Their security team apparently was told by the architect, and I was also told the same thing by the architect, that I was, quote, not a bother, not a problem at all to be around. So because of this, and I remember I was right next to the security guard when he was told that on the phone, and he laughed about it and how cool it was. So he felt that he was obligated to allow me onto the premise after the incidents that occurred, and even took me right into the very area that was burned down and the whole thing. And we sat on property and we just talked, and I mean, it was a really fun experience. And security was only implemented after the arson, not when it was purchased. So he let me go there a few times until I decided not to go back, even with his permission. That's kind of how it went.
Okay. So you are participating in these protests, Black Lives Matter protests. You form a spiritual, emotional connection to this building. There seems to be some evidence of some kind of nefarious occult activity, pentagrams and so forth, rumors of seances and black magic. And arson occurs nearby. You get swept up in the investigation, and actually I believe they even asked you to take a polygraph at one time, meaning, they did see you as a suspect, but ultimately you're cleared. You return afterwards, and the security team allows you on to the property. So where does that leave us, looking back on this whole story? What do you think was going on? Do you think you just have a emotional connection to this place, or do you think this place has some bigger political or conspiratorial significance now that you're looking back at it all from the other side?
Well, first, it's not over. It really isn't. Second, why they had asked me to take a polygraph was because they were asking me questions when I was on. I didn't really sleep that night, so I wasn't really totally sure of what I was even being asked. They'd ask me a question like, was the guy you were with, did he have a lighter? And I'm like, nah, I don't remember him having a lighter. Well, we know that guy smokes. Did he smoke a cigarette? I'm like, now that I think about it, yeah, he did. Hey, you're contradicting yourself. You're not making sense. So they were not, I'd say that it was not set up in a good way, and I would not take their profession into that. I'm very good. And I'm going to say that I think the majority of that could have been handled a lot better. But given how recent and how raw the circumstances were, it ended up being like that. So them seeing me as a suspect is no different from me seeing, a shoplifter put a bracelet on their arm, and I'm thinking, hey, they might steal that. But then 10 minutes later, they put it back on the shelf. And I can't say they've shoplifted, right? That's about the equivalent of that incident. But looking back on it, I think there's a lot that has not been covered, and there is still a great amount that occurred there and might still happen one day. Looking back on it, I don't think I can answer that, just because there is honestly too much that hasn't even been covered in just these few questions. That's occurred outside of the building, that's occurred there, that's occurred everywhere else, where the fuck else. I mean, it's just all kinds of stuff. Looking back at it, it's not over. Looking back at it, the only thing I think looking back at is what's going to happen summer 2022. That's when I think about looking back, all I can think of is looking forward.
And I want to talk about what you think is going to happen in the future in 2022. But before we move on to that, I have a few more questions, because like you said, it's not over. There's still ongoing interaction that you're having around this building. So recently you showed some interesting photos, and if you're able to post them later, that would be cool. You posted them before. So you essentially created cards, like white cards, and you compared it to like ring card girls in the UFC who hold up the round cards between rounds. And my understanding is then you were taking these cards and you were actually walking around the building, because the CCTV cameras you knew were going to see you. So you were using the cards as a way to try and communicate with whoever is behind the building, so to speak. So can you talk a little bit about that and remind us like what was on those cards? Because I'm wondering, what were you trying to communicate to the people there?
This building has been abandoned for 40 years and no one has cared about it. Something extraordinary must have happened here for them to install cameras. Cameras were installed for a bigger purpose, a higher purpose, bigger purpose than to see who's getting inside. And it's a mystery that you have to solve. It's a mystery that we all have to solve. And if we go on property, they won't call the police, and we're going to prove it to you. September 2020, by a girl who I will not name her name, and then 4 people went on property in front of the cameras and climbed the building and proved to me that nothing was wrong. And then the rest is history. So I mention that because that leads to why I would even try to communicate with the cameras. Because from that moment in September 2020 to basically basically to August 2021, communicating with cameras was number one thing all the time. Every time I went there, it was literally the number one way I communicated with them. And even for some reason, their architect, who likes to run things rather than the owners themselves running things, he watched those cameras. According to what I knew, it doesn't make much sense an architect would even have anything to do with this, but he did. And I communicated with him over Facebook and through those cameras. And so me communicating with cameras was almost the only way I could communicate with whoever was running things, for them to see what I was seeing. When 30 people show up to a building at the same time and they're all partying, and I go right in front of the cameras and I'm waving at them frantically, like, do you see what I see? Do you see this shit? And they do. And this occurs all the time. Sometimes I go to the buildings and shit's fucked up. Signs are stolen. The fences are toppled over. People build a skate park on the property with cameras rolling. Come on. And I go up to them and I'm like, who the fuck runs this place? Do you see what I see? Do you fucking see what I see? And this went on for so long. So right before the arson happens, the cameras are mysteriously taken down. Fake for sale sign put up. Architect doesn't know shit, but he doesn't really run the place anyway. Tell me, I'm not really the owner, you know? I'm just the architect. Oh, I can't tell you who. I can't tell you who runs the building, and I can't tell you what it's going to become because I swore my secrecy to this. And I'm like, okay, dope. All right, whatever. So then they install new cameras after they fired the security team. So that leads me up to, these things about the signs, right? This wouldn't be the first time I'd made signs, because I originally made a sign to get the architect's phone number. Made a sign after September 2020 when they told me to investigate the building. It's Mr. I have to solve. The cameras were put up for high purpose. I wrote my number on a sign and just showed it up to the cameras. I said, call me, because we need to talk. And so that's when everything occurred. Started somewhat getting in contact with someone who sort of runs things, but he's not the owner. Fast forward an entire year. Now the new cameras, right? I went back to the same thing. They already have my number. They have my contacts. They know who I am. So I'm not going to write call me on a sign. I'm going to write what I want to tell whoever the fuck really runs the building. I hate to really be so vulgar in this, but this is a big thing to me. So what did I write on these new signs? It was basically, hey, yeah, so I spoke the truth here. You know what the truth is. If you don't own fucking Logan Street, Lambton Street, you don't own the street. The street is city property. So for me, just walking on, this didn't make much sense. You know, I apparently trespassed on this property for an entire year with multiple people doing it. People doing way more than I've ever done, all in front of cameras when they installed 2 cameras, not just one. Literally going up to the cameras and literally tapping on the actual camera lens itself, like no joke, like all the time, no problems. Told the architect, hey, do you have that footage of me throwing bricks at the building? Yeah, I have it, but why do you need it? And I'm like, oh, I just wanted to see it. Nothing. After the arson, I touch a fence. And then the architect himself with his lawyer shows up, and they tell him to get out of there. Then he changes his story. He's like, oh, I'm the owner now. Boy, you didn't tell me that on the phone. And you know, you're an architect who's contracted to work on buildings. What do you have anything to do with this building? Then he told me on the phone, oh, I'm just the architect. I'm not the owner, but I swore my secrecy to it. So he's contradicting himself all the time, and it doesn't make any sense. He himself doesn't make any sense. Contradicts himself all the time. He literally can't even lie. He's not a good liar. So it just is really bad. And even his text messages, it wouldn't make sense. If he showed it to anyone, it's obvious he's lying. So I'm making these signs because I'm trying to get in. That's another thing I wrote on there. I'm like, to the real owners. Whoever the real owners are, I love you, because whatever the fuck's going on here, I love it. And then I wrote on the next one was something like, I love America and I want to serve you. And that goes back to who really runs the building, which is not something we even talked about or discussed. So, yeah. That's what the sign said. And I actually didn't walk around the building. I just went right in front of the cameras. That was off property. So that was it.
So very interesting. Thank you for that explanation. So you also showed me some of the text conversations that you had with the architect, and these seem to be pretty interesting conversations. So what exactly did you say to him, and did he give you any interesting information?
No, he's actually, he doesn't say much, and I see why he doesn't say much. But what did I say to him? I'm not looking at them right now, but it was essentially something to the effect of, I don't want to say his name on this, but hey, Mr. Architect, it's me.
Can I read the text if I don't use any names, if I can find the message?
Right, I mean, I do remember what it was. I could paraphrase it, but yeah, go ahead if you have it.
I have it right here, but do I have your permission to read this out loud? Again, I won't include any names.
No names, nothing specific. Go ahead.
Okay. So, hello, architect. I wrote you a love poem. Do you want to read it? The only reason I message you is because you're connected to the building. Every time I get word of activity related to the property, I want to message you. You know, any normal person would just be like, hey, why are you obsessed with this place? And they'd actually listen. So here's some things I know. You didn't buy the building. You're not a millionaire, dude. You're not the owner. Your architect business is contracted to develop remodeling plans. You swear secrecy to a building. You told me on the phone you're not the owner. No work has been done on it for over a year. Sorry. Over 100 people trespass on camera for a whole year. You could block me at any time. It's so weird. It almost seems like some secret project to me. I would be damned if a federal agency was running that place interested in the odd activity going on there and you're just the face of the project. But I don't think the feds would care about that place. It's not like it had anything to do with Black Lives Matter or Breeway. Beats me though, who really knows? So many questions, so little answers. It makes me want to cry. P.S. I cried so much later after you yelled at me. But it was also amazing. You can try to run me over again. I wouldn't mind. If you ever wanted to show me how architecture works, please do. I think restructuring the buildings is cool. Have a wonderful night and a wonderful Sabbath day. So, first of all, did he try to run you over with his car? What is that about?
Yes. Not only me, but me and the security guard. Yes.
So
Do you want me to explain it?
Please.
Sorry, I can't stop laughing when I think about it. It was actually kind of amazing. Like I said, when I went back to the building one night after the security guard was like, "Hey, I'll let you up to the top. I got permission to go inside the tower now. I have the padlock information. Let's do it." And I'm like, "Well, I'd love to, but Mr. Architect is not going to let me. He's not telling me himself. Whoever is giving him permission to give you permission to give me permission is who I need permission from, even though he's not the owner. He's not telling me who the owners are. Nobody knows who the fuck the owners really are. I can't be told who they are, and they're using this guy to do everything in their place, so I have to get it from this guy. It makes no sense that pause. I'm just saying, gotta say this real quick. I called some architecture firms and I asked them some questions about architecture, and they said, they said, yeah, 99% of the time when an architect is contracted to work on a building, they don't own the building that they're working on, because the $1 million, the supposed $12 million that is needed to reconstruct this building would be coming out of the pocket or the loan of that architect, because he'd also be a business owner. That's not how they make their money. He's not a business owner. His business is ran out of this small, just a normal looking building, right? He's obviously not a millionaire, okay? So most architects are, they're contracted to work on buildings, and this is what they told me. I said, "Hey, would an architect ever be in a building at 1 a.m. with his lawyer?" And they said, typically not. The only reason that an architect would be on property is if they are there with a construction team of people, and that they are, setting out the plans and they're actually working on what needs to be done with the building. Otherwise, typically they wouldn't be there at all. So that already contradicts with why the fuck this dude is already even there. Why he'd be there at any of those hours. Excuse me, hold on. And on top of that, another thing that I had done was I called a few construction firms, and I asked them, I said, "Hey, I gave them some more details, but I said to them, hey, once a property is purchased, maybe about the size of an office building, and it's going to be renovated and turned into something new, how long approximately does it take for construction to begin?" And they said, "Oh, it wouldn't take very long, just a few months." And I said, "So it wouldn't take over a year?" "Oh, no, definitely not. It would maybe at the very most take a little longer than a few months, but not even half a year." I said, "Okay. Well, I know this building that's been purchased literally about a year and a half ago, and nothing's been done on it except all this other weird stuff, but no construction." And they said, "Well, that's very odd." So, sorry, I had to just give that backstory, because that is to explain the role and the position of these people in this very story. So why did he run me over? This guy. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Loud and clear.
Security guard's gonna let me inside the building, and I told him, "Hey, I'm not gonna do that. Because, you know, me applying for the police department, if this dude is not giving me permission, then if the security team gives me permission, it's still technically trespassing. And I know trespassing with this property is the only place where it seemed like no laws even mattered in the past, but things have changed. So I told him, you know, nah, I'm going to come over to the building just to see it because of the sentimental value that it has to me, but I'm not going to go on property. I just kind of want to come over to just see it, and that's okay. I get there, and he asks me if I want to come inside, and I say, no, I just want to sit off to the side. I'm just going to play some music and just talk to you, and that's it. And that's what we did. Played some music. I sang to the music, and it was really good. It was kind of like what I would do inside the building, but right there in parking lot. And so that's what happened. And as I was walking around, I saw this camera, and I'm like, oh my God, is that the real camera? Because they had fucking fake cameras. So I'm like, is that a real one? And he's like, yeah, that one's real. I'm like, oh my God. I freaked out, and I was like, oh my God. I was like waving to it. I'm like, I love you. I'm like, you were the thing that helped me all those times when I was inside the building, and people were like, oh my God, you're here alone? You're a young girl who's here alone with 15 people surrounding her in a circle, and you're here alone? Does anyone even know you're here? I'm like, yeah, actually, somebody does know I'm here. His name is Mr. Architect, and whoever the owners are, and they know we're here on the camera. Are people watching us live on those cameras right now? Yeah, they are. Are those cameras motion detected? Yeah, they are. So I was so excited when I saw the cameras. I was like, oh my God, it's back. They're back. But then the security guard gets a call, and he's like, hey, who the fuck is that? And it's like, it's Sarah, you know her, right? And he's like, get her out of there. We don't want her there right now. They're like, hey, so my boss just called me, and apparently some new guys, we don't know who they are, but some new guys they called my boss, who then just called me and said they saw you on the camera and they don't want you here. And I'm like, shit. So, because I touched, I forgot to mention, I touched the fence. I said, hey, is it illegal if I touch a fence? And they said, nah. Or he said, no, it shouldn't be. Touch the fence. I walked back, and that's when they got the call. And so I'm like, shit, well, okay. And he's like, oh, hey, yeah, these cameras have audio, so they can hear everything we're saying. I'm like, oh, so they just heard me saying, hey, whenever I look at the ice tower, that's the name of the building. Hey, whenever I look at this building, I feel the same as though I was looking at the United States Capitol, like when I went to D.C. The meaning that this building has to me feels the same way as me looking at the capital of this country. And he heard that on camera. And so we went off to the side, and we're sitting on the sidewalk, and we're just talking still. And then we hear a car, like, fast speeding up behind us. We look behind us, there's a car, literally, he slows down right before he gets to us, but he's, like, literally right on us. And then we, like, run out of the way. And then there's the architect. He's like, I'm so such and such and such and such. And I know who you are. And he says my name, my full name. And he's like, you need to not fucking be here. He's like, you stand the fuck over there. He jumps out of his car, and he runs up to the security guard, and he yells this. Every time I've spoken to this guy on the phone, he's very soft-spoken. He did a whole 180. He was like a whole different person. Like, as if someone went up to him and threatened his life. And they're like, I'm going to destroy your life if you don't do this. Because his whole demeanor changed. He acted like a different person. He said, I'm the fucking owner of this building. And you, security, Mr. Security Guard, you need to get the fuck out of here. Get out. And, he told him to get out. He's like, yes, sir, I'm leaving. He's like, you talk to me. He's like, stand over there. He gets on the phone. And I'm like, oh, my God, it's you. I can't wait. I wanted to meet you for so long. I was fangirling over him. I didn't care, what was going on. He gets on the phone with his lawyer. He's like, oh my God. He literally says that. He's like, you're not going to believe who's here. He says my full name. She's here. She's fucking here. I'm laughing. I'm actually laughing. And he's looking at me all pessimistic, and then he also calls the cops and shit. And when they're all about to show up, he's like, so you're the one who's been messaging me all the time. And in my head, he wouldn't let me talk. He kept cutting me off. But in my head, I'm like, dude, you know who I am. You've called me. You got my phone number. You're the one who added me on Facebook, dude. And he won't let me talk, though. He's like, why are you even trying to be here right now? Why do you care about this place? Why do you keep coming here? You look like a fucking grown woman. Why do you care about this place? And every time I tried to talk, he just cut me off. And he's like, I'm like, dude, you never told me not to be here. Not even a single time in a whole year. And he's like, and then he changed. He's like, I told you many times not to be here. And I'm like, you never told me one time. You don't have a single text message to prove it. You told me I was okay to come here. You told the security guards I was okay to come here. Fuck you. And let's just say one thing led to another. His lawyer shows up. I don't know why the fuck his lawyer's there. The cops are like, yeah, it seems like you did have permission to come here, so we can't really do nothing. And they let me go. And they don't really know. I mean, it was really kind of a weird misunderstanding. And he's like, you see this parking lot? This parking lot is my parking lot. You're trespassing just by standing here. I'm like, in my head, I'm thinking, well, you didn't care when 30 people turned up and there's a parking lot full of cars here, all on camera. You didn't care when all these other people did shit, but now you care? And you're telling me you're the owner, but you told me on the phone you're not the owner, and it's obvious you're not. Oh, this doesn't make sense. I leave, and I'm like, well, fuck. So that's where I was like, run me over again, because that shit was amazing. The end.
Wow. Stranger and stranger, curiouser and curiouser the story gets. So one other question I have to ask you. You have told me also you believe that there is someone in your life who seems to have information about you that they should not have. And so you feel that, someone has some kind of access to information about you, and possibly some kind of intelligence agency or unknown organization or group has both knowledge of your personal business and interest in you. So again, you don't have to say anything you don't want to, but can you comment on this at all? What are your thoughts on that situation?
The photos were put there for you. Photos that were put on that shrine, they were to get your attention, and they did. What else? Why are the cameras even put up there? They're put up there to see the seance people. Who the fuck are the seance people? You know who they are. I literally don't know who the fuck they are. Who burned down the building? Seance people. I still don't know who they are. Just think about it. Read between the lines. Why would what was another thing said? I'm sorry. Hold on. This is how I'm answering your question, though, because I'm going to comment on it, but I'm not going to give too many specifics other than this information to let you think about it. Hey, what does the architect think of me? He's thinking, does she know what's going on? Hey, but what else does he think about me? He's thinking, oh, his wife is really jealous of you because he keeps talking about you all the time. That doesn't make any sense. But then when he was yelling at me, he said, you're really destroying my personal life. And I'm like, personal life? He's telling me I destroy his personal life. This guy's saying something about his wife being jealous of me or something like that. And I don't fucking know. I'm going to have to say, I give you those bits and pieces because that's just some of the things we've talked about in regards to this story, but things outside of the story, I think, don't really, the context around my life outside of this is not in really relating to this story. But yeah, that guy, I feel that it would be best that I don't say much further on that. So
100% fair enough. So this has been very fascinating, and there's a lot here to unpack, but I've asked many questions. So if anyone in the audience has a question or comment, maybe this is a good time to open it up. Otherwise, I'll continue the interview. Does anyone have a question for Mrs. Inspirational Madness? Question or comment going once, going twice. Okay, so Inspirational Madness, where do you think you go from here? Are you going to just walk away from this and leave it alone, or are you going to continue to investigate this situation somehow? What do you think?
I was advised by someone who used to be the corrections office, tell me something. And he was in Air Force for like 13 years or something, and he mentioned something to me. You know, even if you go to that building and you're not going on the property, just you turning up there is something about your character, you know, and you're still applying for the police right now. And yeah, it's not illegal, but it's just something about your character. So I'd advise you to don't go back there at all. Hey, there's just been, you know, there's all these people going to this building, and some of them know things about me, and I talked to 2 people, and then 10 people know things about me, and I just don't understand what's going on. Oh, you're talking about the Ice Tower, right? How the fuck did you know I was talking about the Ice Tower? I didn't say anything about it. That was an incident that occurred about a year and a half ago to someone who I did not meet there, who knew a lot of things that were going on in my life, who's not that other person that you'd mentioned earlier. So why I mention that is because there are people outside of that building who I've not told them about it, and they know about it. Okay? So why do I mention that right after mentioning the thing about not going back there because of it's a thing about my character? It's because there were things. Yes, it's bad character to do that, but when you have people in your life who either insinuate that they know a lot about you, or that they know certain things about you, or that they know what you're talking about when you give them no details about it, you be very vague about it, that tells you that there's people out there who know the same things that we're talking about here right now in this very conversation. And because of that, that's a bigger thing than don't go to a building just because it's against your character. If you got people outside of this thing, they know about you, or they know about this building and what was going on there. This is something I did not mention to that ex-Air Force soldier. That's not something I mentioned to him. He doesn't know anything about that. So, you know, yes, it is a good thing about character to not return there. But at the same time, when you have things outside of your life, outside of the situation that are leading back to it, that are coming to you, yeah, that's a grounds to, FBI, please help me. I don't know what's going on. This building, there's all these people in here, and I made a report to the FBI, yeah. And I don't know what's going on here, and blah, blah, blah. Okay, calm down, miss. Calm down, okay? You need to report this to local police. We can't help you, but we're going to take your statement. Goodbye. So, yeah, it's big enough to where I literally made a fucking FBI report about it. And so, where does it go from here? Some other things. Well, as said, a lot of political stuff there. Every time, you know, something would happen, I'd go there and I'd talk about it.
I've got two questions, if I can.
Yeah.
This is Kashika.
Go ahead, Kashika.
Okay. Now, first question: why were you meditating in the building, and why at those times, like late at night?
At night. Well, it originally began because I couldn't go there in the daytime, and I used to not be able to drive. When I couldn't drive, I could only get off work when it was later in the evenings, and I would literally, no lie, like about 12 miles to this place, and it would take about an hour to 2 hours. And when I did that, getting off at work late at night, I'd always end up getting there around midnight, and it would be the only time that I could do that. And it would be very different circumstances if things were reversed and I could drive back then.
Why were you meditating there?
Meditating there was because, like I mentioned in the beginning of this podcast, beginning of this interview, it was like a kind of sensory deprivation sort of environment. The echoing, the vacuum type of silence was in there, the darkness. All of that created a trance-like type of mentality, which allowed me to almost talk to my own subconscious. And it was something that I couldn't just do in my room. The environment was a very important piece to this. And not every abandoned building is going to be like that. In fact, none of the other ones that I've ever explored with anyone else had any resemblance to this. This is the only place like that, and that's why.
Okay, thank you. And the second question: what's your stance on all lives matter? That movement, all lives matter.
Can't say that I know too much about that, is because I guess maybe what I was saying would be along the lines of all lives matter, but at the same time, you know, it's not that I was specifically saying But some people say, well, if you think all lives matter, then there's some problem with that too. But what I was essentially saying was not necessarily that like there was any specific thing that was all inclusive to what was most important, but rather that what was most important to people, the idea of importance and the idea and the passion about passion itself is what was most important, which was found in all relevant perspectives. So all lives matter, Black lives matter, well, fucking white lives matter. People were graffitiing, white supremacists right next to fuck BLM was also going on in there at the same time. So yes, I don't know exactly what to say on that other than I think how people care about that is basically just as important about how people think about how all Black lives matter. It's very much the same to me.
Thank you.
Cheshire Cat, did you have a question you wanted to ask? Cheshire Cat wanted me to ask you to elaborate on the seance people. You mentioned the seance people, so can you tell us any more about the seance people or the seances?
Oh shit. Well, they all look the same. That's the first thing I can tell you. I've never seen this in my life, and it was honestly the coolest thing ever. But it was terrifying, but it was also so thrilling that I was addicted. I didn't run away. Most people are like, I would have run away. I'm like, nah. When I started questioning them, like they all looked the same. Like they all looked like I almost think like rich or middle class sorority fraternity, college-aged, middle-aged, college-aged guys. And they all look the same, like all around the same build, the same kind of clothing, like just kind of a plain t-shirt, pants, shoes, just all nice stuff though. They look like they should not be there. And, very well groomed, either blue eyes, blonde hair, or brown eyes, brown hair, or combination of both. And they all were maybe around the same skin tone. They're just really the same looking, and they acted the same. They would laugh in unison. They would stare in unison. Oh my God, I'll never forget it. Yeah, like this one time I went up there and I heard music and I'm like, oh, they're up here, aren't they? And I go up to the top. This is burned into my memory. If anyone knows, South Park, right? South Park's a great show. I remember there's there's a lot of scenes where they have all of the characters that are just looking at, breaking the fourth wall, and they're just looking at, where the camera would be, even though it's animated. And they're all just staring, and it's like, you look at all the characters, and all of their eyes are the same. They might blink, but for the most part, they all look the same. Their eyes are kind of the same. And the way they're looking at the audience is all the same. This is how those guys looked. Like, I'd go up there and there'd be like 15 dudes. They all turned their head at the same time. Like, I get chills just thinking about this. And then they're all smiling and just wide-eyed. And they're just looking at me, not blinking. And I'm like, holy shit, am I hallucinating? But I wasn't. I took pictures with them too. And I'd be like, so guys, hey, what's up? And then they'd all break, and they'd even joke about things like, whoa, bro, I bet someone's going to come up here, like a news audience, like a newscaster, and they're going to start filming us and try to figure out what's going on here. And then I was like, haha, there's like word that this place might be ran by the feds. Would you still come here if that's true? And then they all just laughed, and they're like, well, we're still trespassing anyway. And they left the gate right wide open for anyone to just come inside. So I'm like, that's true. They did. And yeah, that wasn't the only time that had happened. There were other incidences where they'd all just get in a circle, and then they'd discuss what they'd ask me, and then they'd break away and be like, so why the fuck are you even here anyway? Like, blah, blah, blah. Let's interrogate you for 3 hours. So, I mean, I'd never seen them actually fucking these guys doing the pentagrams, but they were weird. They'd stand. One time, the guys that were like interrogating me, they stood in a circle, man. It was a perfect circle waiting for me at the top. just staring. And I'm like, oh my God. It's like, it's hard to feel threatened by them because they looked like they really were from a fraternity or something. They all look the same. Like Google fraternity guys. That's what they look like. And they acted like that. And it was just, and they never harmed me. They tried to scare me. They said, promise we're not trying to scare you. Promise we're not trying to just like, try to deter you. And that's absolutely what they're doing, And so great dudes. So yeah.
Yo, what's up?
Wow.
Fascinating stuff. So one last chance. If anyone who heard this story has a question for Inspirational Madness, now's your chance.
What led you to this point, Inspirational Madness, to back up the Black Lives Matter movement and the Antifa movement? What really set you off to this point to where it's like, you want to go out there and fight and gain back justice for the community? What led you to that point?
Yeah. Well, I think some of this has to do with how I was raised. Now, I had moved around a lot growing up, and it was not due to military or anything. It was more of a kind of almost a neglectful thing on the behalf of my mother's side of her family, where she felt it runs in the family sometimes. She had something like that going on in her upbringing, so it obviously passed on to her kids, unbeknownst to her own willingness to make that happen. So, I'd been moved around a lot growing up. So one of the things that I had was what I was exposed to in the midst of that was not any specific type of social conditioning, which typically comes when you are raised into a certain class, or rather a specific area that you are raised into. And I never had that. I don't know what that's like. So one thing that occurred to me in that time was I had to mentally find some sort of substitute for not having a conventional environment or class that you would be raised into. And one of that was the people themselves. So it was, since I didn't have, one class or one environment that I was accustomed to, it became everyone and everything around me that was that thing that I was trying to become involved with. So this came to, this was all post BLM, all post 2020 was, well, I didn't feel like I wasn't raised where I was with the preppy kids or, the loners or something like that. I bounced back and forth in high school and stuff between, one semester I'm popular and then the other I'm a loner. And one semester I don't have any friends and then by the end I have all of them. So it's like I keep jumping back and forth, right? So I didn't have a specific thing. So when it came to BLM and all that, I was already under this mentality that I felt that I could, because I had been exposed to different cultures and classes, just trying to find my way, basically. I felt that because of this, there was a certain benefit and a certain connectedness and bondedness that exists in all classes. And because I wasn't completely submitted or committed to one of them, I was able to tell this amongst them all. So why go into BLM with this mentality was because, well, they were still under that impression too, that they were also just as equal to the other classes that didn't give a crap about them. Or, they felt the same way, but with their own community, their own causes. It was, so, but why BLM? Because this was the big one that was taking place at that time that was on a mass scale. It wasn't like a specific individual communities, problems. Family in Florida was like, hey, are you in the protest, in such and such? And I said, yeah. They're like, dude, we see you on TV right now, and they're halfway across the country. So, if something's that big, it's affecting not only smaller communities, it's affecting the whole fucking country. And people who I talk to in other countries, they're like, yeah, I know your exact city, and I know who died there because it's being broadcasted up there with like George Floyd and all that. I'm trying to make it a little vague, but that's pretty much what was going on. So this is a big thing. What's up?
Where did these protests take place? Were you here in Minnesota as well?
Louisville, Kentucky.
Okay.
All right, so we've covered a lot here. We've discussed a lot. So I'm going to ask you, Inspirational Madness, what do you want people to take away who listen to this in the live audience or later on YouTube or BitChute? What is the message you want them to kind of take away from all this?
Essentially that a few things, but I mean, just to kind of make it brief, I know this is a big topic. I can ramble on forever about it, but beauty is found in the most unexpected places. Beauty can be found in literally anything that can have meaning to it. You know, and also that there's more. There's more. You know, there's more than meets the eye, basically, to just about everything in your life. You live your everyday life in some way, or maybe it's more than average, or maybe it's only average to you, and there's more than what you're experiencing right there. The past, the present, and the future take place all at the same time, okay? Every brick that fell off that building was the same as another life lost, okay? And I'd look at that building and I'd say, this building was built in the late 1800s. And it's true, no one has cared about it, right? Why would anyone find some meaning in something that's that rugged, that old, that no one cared about, no one wanted to do anything, just like that girl told me? Well, it meant, it was dilapidated, it was broken, it was destroyed. It wasn't anything, it wasn't a place you'd find yourself, trying to have a great time in, other than to explore. It wasn't like a venue, it wasn't anything like that. But, it was important to me because of what I could create out of it. So when you look at something, no matter what it is, it might not mean anything to you, but to someone, nothing can mean everything. And there's definitely a moral to take away from it. How something that was nothing can be transformed into something bigger than it ever was, probably, even in its past. So, yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for sharing your story. It's fascinating. Thank you to everybody who attended. And I am also going to go ahead and post Inspirational Madness's video podcast interview, which was your last appearance on the roundtable. If anyone wants to hear more from Mrs. Inspirational Madness, aka Agent Breeway, you can find her last episode here in general chat. Thank you so much, Madness. Thank you, everybody. Please join us on the Roundtable Discord server, and make sure you like, follow, and subscribe to all 4 of our content channels in the #RT Podcast channel, YouTube, and BitChute. Hundreds of great episodes, debates, interviews, and new events every day at 8 p.m. and other times. You can see those announced in the announcements channel. Thanks again, Inspirational Madness. Thanks, everybody. Let's jump up to the Roundtable voice chat and hang out for the rest of the night.